rain fell in thin, jagged lines, bouncing off the asphalt like a million tiny drums. Emma's small hands trembled as she pressed her soaked fingers against the cracked window of the abandoned warehouse. Her chest heaved, each breath ragged and shallow, but her eyes never left the figure just beyond the puddles. A police dog, sleek and black with eyes like liquid amber, padded cautiously across the slick floor, nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air. Emma had tried to scream for help, but her voice had been swallowed by the storm. Then, in a desperate flash of clarity, she lifted a small, trembling hand and waved. Her rescue signal, learned in a class that now felt like a lifetime ago. The dog paused. Its ears twitched. And then it moved, not with hesitation, but with a fierce, unwavering purpose that made the hairs on the back of Emma's neck stand up. In that instant, she felt a strange, gut-deep certainty. Help had arrived, in the form of a creature more brave than any human she had ever known. The rain fell in a relentless sheet so thick that it blurred the outlines of the abandoned warehouse across the street, turning familiar shapes into ghosts. Emma crouched behind the cracked window, her tiny frame shivering under the thin jacket she'd grabbed in her panic. The water ran down her face, mingling with tears. She didn't know she was crying, dripping onto her fingertips as she pressed them against the cold glass. She could hear the storm's symphony all around her, pattering on the roof, slamming against rusted metal, swirling in the gutters outside. But there was another rhythm she noticed, the soft, deliberate tapping of paws against concrete. The sound was different. It was purposeful. Her pulse leapt violently in her chest as she caught movement in the dim light, a shadow gliding between puddles and scattered debris. It was the police dog. She had seen the photographs, the glossy images of canine units in magazines, but this was different. Alive, breathing, real, and closer than she had ever imagined. The dog's black coat glistened with rain, and its eyes, liquid amber and impossibly intelligent, seemed to scan everything at once. It wasn't just looking, it was understanding. Emma's heart squeezed painfully in her chest. This creature might be the only thing that could save her. She wanted to call out, but her voice caught in her throat. The storm swallowed it whole. Every scream and plea she imagined evaporated before it could form, leaving her mouth dry and useless. Panic surged like electricity through her limbs, coiling tight in her stomach. She pressed her forehead to the cold glass, and for a moment the world seemed to tilt. She imagined the storm as a giant, invisible hand, trying to push her back into the shadows where no one could find her. But then, in the blur of fear, a memory surfaced. A lesson from school, a small class about her rescue signals that she had learned half-heartedly, never thinking she'd need it. Her hand rose slowly, trembling, fingers shaking with cold and adrenaline. She made the motion, a small wave, deliberate, rhythmic, the signal she hoped the dog would recognize. Time seemed to stretch. The dog paused mid-step, head tilting slightly as it sniffed the air. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't tell if the dog had noticed her, or if it was merely ignoring her out of instinct. Every second felt like an hour. The storm outside became a blur of motion and sound, and inside Emma felt her small world shrink to the span of that gaze, the dog's amber eyes meeting hers, searching, calculating. Finally, the dog moved, slowly at first, cautious, measuring every step as if it were testing the space between them. Then faster, more confident, every movement deliberate, precise, full of purpose. Emma's heart leapt as she pressed closer to the window, straining to follow its path. The warehouse was full of hazards, piles of splintered wood, fallen crates, broken glass. But the dog navigated them flawlessly, each paw finding purchase on the slick floor. Emma felt a strange combination of awe and relief. This was no ordinary animal. It was a protector, a silent sentinel. She whispered to herself almost inaudibly, "Come on, come on." The storm seemed to respond to her fear, as if it were testing her resolve. A gust of wind sent a loose metal sheet clanging against the roof, and the echo made Emma flinch, but the dog didn't falter. Its tail flicked once, then straightened, ears forward, every muscle taut with readiness. Emma realized that she had to trust it completely. No hesitation, no second guessing. Her tiny hand, still wet and trembling, pressed against the glass as if by sheer will she could communicate, guide, and plead all at once. The dog's gaze never wavered. In that instant, Emma understood what trust could look like, silent, patient, unwavering, born from instinct and purpose. Every step the dog took was a lesson in courage. Emma mirrored it instinctively, pressing against the wall for balance. her soaked shoes sliding slightly on the puddles forming beneath her. Her lungs burned from shallow breaths, and yet she forced herself to stay calm, to think. The rain drenched her, seeping through her jacket and chilling her to the bone, but she didn't care. Every sensation, the sting of cold, the smell of wet earth and rusted metal, the distant rumbles of thunder, heightened her awareness. It all became part of a single focused moment where survival was the only thing that mattered. She noticed the dog's ears twitch at the sound of shifting debris, the way it paused, sniffed, and assessed the environment before moving forward again. Emma followed every movement like a student learning from a master she could not speak to. The signal she had given was simple, but it had summoned more than help. It had summoned hope, courage, and a connection that transcended words. She realized she was no longer completely alone. The dog was her anchor, her guide through the storm, a living embodiment of everything she hoped could save her. Then came a low, rumbling sound from the far end of the warehouse, a warning, subtle yet ominous. Emma froze, muscles stiff, eyes wide. The dog didn't flinch. Instead, it crouched slightly, nostrils flaring, eyes scanning. Emma's fear spiked, but alongside it came a strange sense of calm. If the dog could face whatever danger lurked in the shadows without flinching, maybe she could too. She drew a trembling breath, trying to steady her racing heart. The storm outside battered the walls like a relentless drum. Yet inside, time had condensed into this single fragile moment of mutual recognition and determination. Finally, the dog came close enough that Emma could see the subtle rise and fall of its chest with every controlled breath. Its fur, slick and shiny with rain, pressed against its lean, muscular frame, and she realized how much strength and purpose resided in this creature. Slowly, carefully, it circled her, almost in a protective dance, and for the first time since the storm began, Emma felt her panic soften into something else, the faintest flicker of hope. She pressed her small palms against its wet coat, and it pressed back gently, ears angled toward her, alert but calm. It was as if the dog were saying, "I've got you. I see you. You are not alone." Emma realized then that the storm outside, the dark warehouse, and the fear she had carried for hours, all of it had led her to this moment. She wasn't just surviving. She was beginning to understand what it meant to trust, to relinquish control, to let another being guide her through darkness. The rain continued to fall, relentless, but now it was no longer an enemy. It was a backdrop, a texture to the story unfolding. And in that rain, amid shattered glass, wet concrete, and the echo of distant thunder, Emma understood something profound. The smallest signal given with courage could summon something far greater than fear, a protector, a hero, and a chance at being saved. The dog stayed by her side, alert, vigilant, eyes never leaving hers. Emma, shivering but emboldened, took a tentative step forward, then another. The floor was slick, the obstacles real, but with every step she took, she felt a little stronger, a little braver. And as the storm raged outside, she whispered a silent thank you, not knowing if the dog understood, and perhaps it didn't matter. Because in that moment, she had learned the first lesson of survival. Hope could arrive in the most unexpected form, even in the eyes of a police dog standing in the middle of a storm. The rain had slowed to a persistent drizzle, but the warehouse remained a shadowed labyrinth of broken beams, puddles, and the faint metallic tang of rusted machinery. Emma pressed herself against the cold wall, knees drawn up to her chest, teeth chattering, and yet she felt a strange, fragile calm. The police dog sat a few feet away, eyes scanning, ears twitching at every sound. The drip of water from the leaking roof, the faint hum of distant traffic, even the soft scrape of a falling piece of debris. There was intelligence in its stillness, a patience that Emma had never seen in any living creature. Slowly, she began to understand that it wasn't just here to rescue her. It was here to read her, to gauge her fear, to decide the best way to keep her safe. She inched forward, wet shoes squeaking on the puddles, heart hammering with every step. The dog followed her with a fluid, seamless grace, keeping its body parallel to hers, eyes never leaving her face. Emma realized that it watched not just her movements, but her hesitations, her breaths, the subtle trembling of her hands. And in that observation, she felt something extraordinary, a connection forming, silent but profound. For the first time since being trapped, she felt understood, seen not just as a frightened child, but as a partner in survival. She whispered, "I'm scared," though she knew it didn't need words. The dog's amber gaze softened, if such a thing was possible, and she could almost feel reassurance radiating from it, like warmth against the chill of the damp warehouse. The warehouse seemed alive now, every creak of metal and splash of water amplifying their bond. Emma studied the dog, noticing small details. The way its ears swiveled towards sounds she couldn't hear, the subtle tension in its back legs that spoke of readiness, the way its tail twitched slightly in a rhythm she intuitively recognized as communication. Her panic began to ease, replaced by a quiet awe. She felt seen, guided, and protected all at once, as though she and this animal shared a language beyond words. She realized that trust didn't need explanation. It was earned in silent understanding, in the consistent, unwavering presence of someone who refused to let go. The dog moved closer, brushing her shoulder with its damp fur, and she flinched at first, then leaned into the contact, taking comfort in the steady, reassuring weight. She could feel her heartbeat gradually slow, sinking in rhythm, almost mirroring the dog's controlled breathing. Emma's small hands reached out instinctively, fingertips grazing the slick fur along its back, and in that touch, a wordless promise passed between them. "I will not leave." And she, in turn, felt a surge of courage, fragile but potent, rising within her chest. The storm outside, once a deafening enemy, had become background music to this delicate dance of trust and recognition. Every step they took together deepened the bond. The warehouse floor was littered with obstacles. Rusted nails, shattered glass, puddles deep enough to chill her bones. Emma moved cautiously, but the dog's silent guidance was a beacon. It nudged her forward when hesitation froze her, paused when danger loomed, and always stayed close enough to bridge the space between fear and action. Emma's confidence grew with every careful step. She realized she had been alone for hours, but in this moment, she was not. She had an ally, a partner, a guardian whose loyalty did not waver despite the chaos around them. A gust of wind rattled a broken shutter, sending a cascade of water and debris clattering to the floor. Emma flinched, but the dog remained composed, tail high, eyes alert, muscles coiled yet controlled. Watudia. Emma mirrored it instinctively, learning to trust its judgment rather than her panic. Every movement was a lesson, every pause a moment to breathe, every glance a reassurance. The dog's amber eyes seemed to say, "I see you, I know what you're feeling, I will guide you." And in that wordless conversation, Emma discovered a calm she had never known, a quiet strength that had lain dormant beneath her fear. As they navigated deeper into the warehouse, Emma noticed subtle details she had missed in her initial terror. The faint smell of wet concrete mingled with rust, the soft echo of raindrops falling from the corrugated metal roof, and the shadows cast by fragmented light that danced across the puddles. Why, each sensory detail grounded her, pulling her focus from panic to presence. The dog's steady companionship transformed the environment from threatening to navigable. She began to notice patterns in its behavior. The way it approached corners, how it sniffed the air for unseen dangers, how its body shifted to anticipate movement. Slowly, almost imperceptibly. She absorbed these lessons, internalizing the unspoken guidance. They came to a narrow corridor, partially blocked by a toppled shelf. Emma froze, panic prickling at the edges of her mind. The dog sat at the opening, eyes flicking back and forth between her and the path ahead. Emma swallowed hard, heart pounding. She felt the wetness of her hair clinging to her face, the chill seeping into her bones. But she drew a deep, steadying breath. The dog stepped forward first, confident and measured. Emma followed, small, careful steps that became more fluid as she matched its pace. She realized then that bravery wasn't the absence of fear. It was acting in spite of it. And sometimes it was as simple as following someone who knew the way. Hours, or maybe minutes, time seemed irrelevant, passed in this rhythm. Emma learned to anticipate the dog's movements, adjusting her steps to match its guidance. Each small success, avoiding a sharp shard of metal, navigating a slippery puddle, built a fragile tower of confidence within her chest. The warehouse, once an oppressive maze, became a shared arena of survival, a stage where two beings learned to communicate without words, relying on instinct, intuition, and mutual respect. And then it happened. Distant noise, faint but distinct, a low, rumbling groan, like metal shifting under pressure, echoed through the corridor. Emma froze, stomach twisting. The dog stiffened, ears forward, muscles taut, yet it did not panic. It turned to her, gaze steady, as if to say, "I see it too, but we can handle this." Emma felt her fear transform into determination. She wasn't just a scared child anymore. She was a participant, an observer, a partner in a silent partnership forged in storm and fear. Every trembling heartbeat and icy shiver became a pulse of awareness, a reminder that she was learning, adapting, surviving. By the time they reached a small, dry alcove in the far corner of the warehouse, Emma felt a sense of calm she had never imagined possible in such chaos. She knelt, pressing her palms to her knees, and the dog sat beside her, its head level with hers, eyes bright and steady. She rested a trembling hand on its wet fur, feeling warmth and life, and whispered, almost to herself, a thank you. It was unnecessary. The connection was already complete. In the silent understanding between them, Emma realized the dog had become more than a rescuer. It was a mirror of courage, a teacher of trust, a living embodiment of the calm she had needed to find within herself. Outside, the storm had not ended, but the warehouse seemed quieter now, almost suspended in time. Emma's chest rose and fell in sync with the dog's steady breathing. She had learned something profound, that understanding didn't always require words, that bravery could be reflected in the eyes of another being, and that sometimes the smallest gestures, a wave, a glance, a gentle nudge, could forge bonds that transcended fear. And as she looked into the dog's unwavering gaze, she realized that for the first time in hours she felt truly, deeply, and unshakably seen. The warehouse seemed to stretch endlessly, a maze of shadows, shattered crates, and the lingering smell of wet wood and rust. Emma's soaked shoes squelched against puddles that reflected the faint, flickering lights above. Each step was a careful negotiation, balancing fear and necessity, the cold creeping into her bones like an uninvited weight. Behind her, the police dog moved fluidly, ears pricked, body low, scanning every corner, every shadow, as if it could sense danger before it touched the air. Emma realized that she was no longer simply following. It felt as if they were moving as one, a single unit of cautious determination. A sudden crash echoed through the warehouse, a stack of metal pipes giving way somewhere in the shadows. Emma jumped, heart lurching painfully, and froze. The dog's ears twitched, head tilting slightly, eyes sharp. Then, with an almost imperceptible nod of its head, it began forward again, motioning her silently to follow. Each step she took was a delicate negotiation between fear and courage. She leaned on the dog's instincts, trusting the intelligence and experience in its movements more than she trusted her own judgment. The dog's amber eyes flicked back at her, patient, reassuring, communicating a simple truth. Together, they could survive this. The terrain became treacherous. Piles of splintered wood jutted out like jagged teeth, broken glass glittered like cruel stars on the concrete floor, and water pooled in deep, shifting patches that threatened to swallow her small feet. Emma's muscles burned with effort as she skirted the hazards, arms outstretched for balance, teeth clenched to suppress a whimper. Every sense was heightened, the smell of damp rot, the metallic tang of rust, the cold sting of water dripping down her neck. The dog moved seamlessly through the obstacles, tail high, body taut with vigilance. Emma noticed how it paused briefly at each hazard, assessing, then moved forward with grace and precision, teaching her without words, guiding her without command. At one point, Emma's foot slipped on a slick puddle, sending her arms flailing. She landed hard on her knees, scraping palms against the rough concrete. Pain shot through her, hot and sharp, and for a second she wanted to curl up and cry. But the dog was there instantly, nose nudging her side, amber eyes locked on hers. A low, gentle whine seemed to pass between them, unspoken yet deeply understood. Emma drew a shuddering breath, pushing herself up, her palms stinging, knees trembling, and followed again. She realized then that bravery was not the absence of pain or fear. It was moving forward despite them, bolstered by trust and the quiet companionship of a presence that refused to let her fail. The deeper they moved into the warehouse, the more oppressive the shadows became. The faint light from flickering bulbs above created long, wavering shapes that seemed almost alive. Every noise, the drip of water, the scrape of a shifting board, the faint rumble of the storm outside, felt magnified, a symphony of danger that made her chest tighten. The dog led, weaving through the maze of debris, pausing only when necessary, always alert. Emma noticed small gestures, the tilt of its head, the flick of its ears, the shift in weight that indicated safety or risk. Slowly, instinct replaced panic, fear softened into heightened awareness, and she began to move with a cautious grace she hadn't known she possessed. A sudden louder crash, a beam snapping under its own weight. made Emma stumble backward, nearly losing her balance. Her heart hammered violently against her ribs, threatening to escape entirely. She pressed against the wall for support, hands trembling, and looked at the dog. Its body was tense, muscles coiled, tail flicking slightly, ears forward. And then it did something remarkable. It circled her slowly, brushing her shoulder with its wet fur, grounding her with the weight and presence of something solid and dependable. She pressed her forehead to its side, letting the warmth and strength of its body anchor her frayed nerves. In that moment, she understood what it meant to be seen, truly seen, by another being. The path narrowed into a corridor partially blocked by fallen crates and twisted metal. Emma hesitated, feeling the weight of every decision. One wrong step could send her sprawling across shards of glass or into a hidden puddle deep enough to choke her with cold. The dog paused, sniffing the air, then crouched slightly, body low but ready to spring, eyes flicking between her and the corridor ahead. Emma swallowed her panic, drew a deep breath, and followed its lead. Every cautious step brought her closer to a fragile kind of mastery over fear. The realization that survival was as much mental as physical. As they moved, Emma became acutely aware of her own body. Muscles burned, knees scraped, fingers raw from gripping wet, jagged surfaces. Each sound, the drip of water, the subtle shift of debris under the dog's weight, her own cautious footfalls, was a reminder of the thin line between safety and disaster. Yet paradoxically, each challenge strengthened her resolve. The dog had taught her something vital without words. Trust your instincts, move deliberately, observe constantly, and never forget that courage is born in the quiet spaces between fear. The warehouse seemed to conspire against them, testing every ounce of resilience. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the ceiling, revealing the full scale of their surroundings. A cavern of broken machinery, fallen scaffolding, and shadowed corners that could hide danger at every turn. Emma's chest tightened and she pressed closer to the dog, feeling the weight of its presence beside her. Its gaze never wavered, eyes sharp, body coiled in readiness. She realized that this was more than a partnership. It was a communion, a silent promise that neither would falter, neither would fail. Finally, they reached a section of the warehouse that seemed impassable. A jumble of debris stacked haphazardly, water pooling at dangerous depths beneath twisted beams. Emma froze, panic threatening to consume her again. But the dog moved forward confidently, stepping lightly across the obstacles, tail flicking for balance, eyes focused. Emma followed, mimicking its precise steps, learning the rhythm, trusting its instincts completely. Every scrape, every slip, every heartbeat reinforced the bond between them. Fear remained, but it was tempered by understanding, by trust, by the unwavering presence of the dog guiding her through the shadows. By the time they reached a narrow, partially dry corridor leading toward what might be an exit, Emma felt a deep, quiet shift within herself. The warehouse had been a crucible, the storm a relentless force, and yet she had endured. She had learned to move through fear with deliberate purpose, to trust another being in the most vulnerable of circumstances, and to recognize courage not as the absence of fear, but as its companion. The dog's amber eyes met hers once more, and she knew without doubt that they were a team bound by silent understanding, respect, and the shared triumph of having moved through shadows and debris together. The rain had finally eased into a persistent drizzle, turning the streets outside into rivers of silver reflecting the fractured morning light. But inside the warehouse, the danger had not yet passed. Emma's muscles ached from hours of careful navigation, knees raw, fingers pruned and cold, and yet she pressed forward, guided by the unwavering presence of the police dog. Every step felt heavier now, the obstacles more menacing, the shadows deeper and less forgiving. Her small frame moved with deliberate caution, ears straining for the slightest hint of danger. Each breath was a shallow rasp, lungs burning, heart hammering in a rhythm that threatened to shake her balance. Lay the final obstacle, a flooded underpass, the water rising swiftly, swallowing the concrete in churning, murky depths. It seemed impossible to cross. Emma froze at the edge, toes skimming the cold water, shivering violently. Panic surged, icy and suffocating, wrapping around her chest. Her teeth chattered, and for a moment she considered retreating, searching for some other path, some safer option. But the dog didn't hesitate. Its amber eyes held hers, steady and unwavering, radiating a fierce, wordless assurance. It was as if the creature was saying, "You can do this. I am here. Together we will make it." The dog stepped into the water first, movements precise, each paw finding firm footing beneath the turbulent surface. Emma watched, wide-eyed, shivering, and then followed, stepping carefully into the cold current. The water lapped at her knees, numbing her legs almost instantly. She gasped, shivering violently, but the dog pressed forward, constant and unyielding, guiding her through the swirling waters. Every instinct screamed at her to stop, to turn back, but every glance at the dog reminded her that retreat was not an option. The connection between them was palpable, a silent promise that they were moving forward as one. The underpass was dark, the walls slick with rainwater and grime, but the dog navigated the treacherous path flawlessly. Emma's small hands braced against the slimy walls for support, scraping her palms, muscles burning with effort. Water threatened to pull at her ankles with each step, but she forced herself to focus, drawing courage from the dog's steady rhythm, its unwavering confidence, its silent determination. She realized that bravery wasn't the absence of fear. It was pressing forward despite it, finding strength and trust, in connection, and in the unspoken bond that had formed under storm-swept skies. Halfway through, a sudden wave of water surged from the side, startling Emma. She slipped, splashing cold liquid up to her waist, gasping in shock. Panic clawed at her chest, threatening to overwhelm her. But the dog was there instantly. Its nose nudged her side, tail flicking, eyes locked on hers. She drew a ragged breath, chest heaving, and followed its lead. Step by step, inch by inch, they moved forward, the dog constantly vigilant, its instincts guiding them safely through the turbulent waters. Emma felt the cold seep into her bones, but alongside it came something unexpected. A fierce, burning determination, a will to survive, fueled by the trust that had been forged in hours of shared struggle. The walls of the underpass seemed to close in, the darkness pressing against them like a living thing. Every sound, the slap of water against concrete, the distant roar of the storm above, the subtle splash of the dog's paws, was magnified, heightening the tension. Emma's heart raced with each step, but she began to notice the rhythm of their movement, the quiet synchronization of their survival dance. The dog's tail flicked once, twice, guiding her, its body a beacon of confidence in the murky darkness. She realized that instinct and trust had replaced fear, that courage was no longer something she had to find. It had become a part of her, reflected in the steady amber eyes beside her. A final surge of water threatened to push her off balance. She stumbled, fingers scrabbling for purchase, knees slipping, and for a heartbeat, it seemed as though the current would claim her. But the dog pressed closer, nudging her forward, its wet body solid and reassuring. She inhaled sharply, bracing herself, and stepped carefully over a submerged ledge, following the rhythm of the dog's precise movements. Every muscle screamed in protest, but she ignored it, focusing only on the amber eyes that guided her, the silent assurance that together they could overcome the impossible. At last, the end of the underpass loomed, a faint light, the promise of dry ground, safety, and escape. Emma's breath came in ragged gasps, shivering violently, soaked to the bone but exhilarated. She took a tentative step forward, then another, the dog pressing forward beside her, constant and unwavering. Each movement felt monumental, a triumph over fear, over exhaustion, over the storm that had threatened to consume them. The world outside the underpass was brighter now, filtered through the dissipating rain, promising warmth, safety, and a return to life beyond the shadows. As they emerged, Emma fell to her knees on the dry ground, chest heaving, muscles trembling from exhaustion. The dog circled her, nudging her gently with its wet nose, tail flicking with what seemed like quiet triumph. Emma pressed her hands into its fur, tears streaming down her face, and whispered a shaky thank you, though words were insufficient. The dog's amber eyes locked with hers, patient and understanding, and she realized that they had survived not just through instinct, but through trust, through the bond that had carried them through the storm, debris, and rushing water. She watched the dog stand proudly, body poised and alert, scanning the area as if ensuring no threat remained. And in that moment, Emma felt an overwhelming surge of gratitude and awe. This creature, a police dog trained for rescue, had become more than a savior. It had become a teacher, a partner, and a mirror reflecting the courage she had discovered within herself. The storm was no longer an enemy. It was a backdrop to a story of survival, trust, and triumph. Finally, Emma stood, still trembling, still soaked, but alive in a way that transcended mere survival. She straightened, brushing the cold from her hair and clothes, and watched as the dog lingered a moment before turning, tail high, stride purposeful. The amber eyes met hers one last time, and she felt a connection that would endure long after the rain ceased, long after the warehouse was left behind. It was a bond forged in fear and trust and chaos and courage, a living testament to what could be achieved when one allowed fear to guide them into strength rather than paralyze them. Emma exhaled, chest rising and falling with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. She felt the weight of the past hours settle into something she could carry forward, a memory of courage, connection, and hope. The dog had led her through the impossible, and in doing so, had shown her that the smallest spark, a signal, a gesture, a glance, could ignite the fiercest determination, the deepest courage, and the most profound bond between two lives in a moment of crisis. As the rain finally ceased, leaving the world glistening and fresh, Emma realized that she was forever changed. She would carry the memory of this climb to safety in every heartbeat, every cautious step, every glance at shadows and light. And as she watched the dog disappear into the morning mist, she whispered a quiet promise. She would never forget the eyes that understood her fear, the steadfast presence that guided her, and the courage that had been born in the storm. The storm had finally passed. Outside, the streets shimmered with a reflective sheen, puddles catching the first pale hints of sunlight, turning the world into a fragile mosaic of silver and gold. Emma stood on the cracked pavement, soaked through, shivering yet utterly alive. The warehouse loomed behind her, dark and silent now, its dangers contained within shadowed memories. She drew a deep, shuddering breath, tasting the fresh, rain-washed air that seemed to pulse with relief. The world felt new, and yet the imprint of fear and survival lingered in her chest like a quiet drumbeat, reminding her of the journey she had endured. The police dog stood nearby, ears flicked forward, tail relaxed but alert, scanning the surroundings with the same vigilance it had maintained through every harrowing step. Emma approached slowly, cautious yet reverent, and knelt beside it. She pressed her damp hands into the dog's slick fur, feeling warmth, life, and the unspoken strength that had guided her through the storm, through debris, and through her own tremors of fear. The dog leaned gently into her touch, eyes meeting hers with that same unwavering amber intelligence that had first met her desperate signal. No words were needed. They understood each other completely. Emma's small hands trembled as she hugged the dog, feeling the pulse of its muscles, the steadiness of its heartbeat against her cheek. Tears streamed down her face, mingling with the rainwater, and she whispered a fragile thank you, though the enormity of the gratitude she felt could not be captured in words. In that moment, she realized that the dog had given her more than rescue. It had given her courage, connection, and the first flicker of trust that she could survive without fear paralyzing her. Every anxious heartbeat, every shiver, every step forward now felt like a victory carved from the storm itself. The warehouse behind them remained silent, but the world outside was stirring. Birds, tentatively brave after the rain, called to each other, wings flapping in hesitant arcs. A breeze carried the scent of wet earth and new beginnings. Emma rose slowly, letting the dog step beside her, and together they moved down the empty street. Her legs ached, muscles trembling with fatigue, but her heart carried a new rhythm, the pulse of hope, resilience, and trust forged under extreme trial. The dog walked beside her, constant and reassuring, each pawfall echoing in her mind like a heartbeat of courage. As they rounded a corner, the city began to awaken, fully distant traffic hum mingling with birdsong, sunlight catching the edges of rooftops and puddles. Emma paused, shivering but smiling through her exhaustion. She realized she had survived not just the storm, but the terror, the debris, the near despair, and in the process, she had learned something indelible. Courage could be found in trust, even in the smallest of gestures, even in the eyes of a creature who knew nothing of words, only action, instinct, and loyalty. She watched the dog carefully, noting the way its coat glistened in the morning light, tail flicking once in quiet contentment, eyes bright and alert. For a moment, Emma felt a pang of longing. This companion, this guardian, would not accompany her beyond this threshold. And yet, she knew that what they had shared could not be diminished by distance. The bond was etched into her memory, a living testament to the courage they had discovered together. She knelt once more, pressing her palms into the dog's fur, whispering a promise to remember, to honor, to never forget the bravery and loyalty that had saved her life. The dog lingered a moment as if acknowledging her gratitude before turning and disappearing down a glistening alley, paws splashing softly in shallow puddles. Emma watched, heart swelling with a strange mix of relief, awe, and a quiet ache. She felt the weight of the experience settle into her chest, a rhythm she would carry with her always. The understanding that courage and hope could arrive in unexpected forms, that rescue could be silent, patient, and entirely wordless. And as the dog's silhouette vanished into the misty light, she felt a profound sense of closure and awe. Emma drew a shaky, deep breath, the wet air filling her lungs with a promise of life beyond fear. She looked back once at the warehouse, now quiet, empty, and safe, then forward at the city awakening around her. Each drop of rain that lingered on leaves and pavement sparkled like a jewel, a reminder of what had passed and what had been gained. The storm had been fierce, unforgiving, and relentless, but it had not defeated her. She had endured, she had survived, and she had learned the power of trust, connection, and courage in the eyes of another living being. The city around her buzzed with life, unnoticed by most, but every sound, distant laughter, a car splashing through a puddle, the soft rustle of leaves, felt like a symphony of new beginning. Emma took a tentative step forward, then another, each one a statement. She had been tested, she had faced fear, and she had emerged not broken, but whole, forever changed. The storm had left scars, both physical and emotional, yet within those scars lay the memory of resilience, the echo of courage, and the imprint of an amber gaze that had watched over her when she had thought she was utterly alone. She paused for a moment at the edge of a puddle, watching her reflection ripple in the rainwater. For a fleeting heartbeat, she imagined the dog beside her once more. Eyes steady, tail flicking, a silent partner in survival. And she smiled, realizing that the memory itself was enough to carry her forward. Life could continue now, but she would never forget what she had learned. That rescue could arrive in the most unexpected forms, that bravery was born from trust, and that sometimes the smallest hand signal, the slightest gesture, could ignite an extraordinary bond strong enough to carry them both through darkness and into dawn. Emma stepped forward finally, the wet streak gleaming beneath her feet, every muscle sore, every nerve still tingling from adrenaline. Yet she felt something lighter in her chest, a quiet, enduring hope. The dog had gone, but its lessons remained, etched into her very being. She would carry them forever, the courage, the loyalty, the understanding that even in the depths of fear, connection could shine like a beacon. And as she walked toward the emerging sun, the world felt impossibly vast, and yet intimately familiar, full of life, promise, and the memory of a silent guardian who had shown her what it meant to be truly seen and truly saved. The morning sun broke fully over the horizon, touching everything in gold. Emma paused, feeling the warmth on her wet face, listening to the city hum with awakening energy. Somewhere, in the quiet of the streets behind her, the faint echo of paws faded, leaving only the memory, the lesson, and the bond that would never be erased. She smiled softly, heartful as she whispered into the new day, "Thank you." And in that moment, everything felt whole, everything felt possible, and the quiet dawn carried her forward into a world that was no longer terrifying, only alive with potential, hope, and the lingering power of trust forged in the storm.